Have you ever felt invisible to the eyes of the world, that your worth is measured by what others see on your exterior, rather than the strength that beats in your heart? Today, I bring you a story that will transform your way of seeing human dignity and the silent power of those who seem to have no voice. This is the story of Esperanza Dolores, a woman who in 1879 Mexico discovered that true nobility is not inherited, but built with each gesture of love and each act of silent courage. A narrative that teaches us that sometimes the most luminous souls inhabit the bodies that the world decides to ignore. Before I begin, let me ask, from what corner of the world are you listening to us? I love knowing that these words travel across borders to reach you. If this story touches your heart as much as it touched mine, don't forget to subscribe and leave your like. Your support allows these narratives to reach more souls who need to hear that everyone, absolutely everyone, has incalculable worth. Year 1879. Place Tierra Salada, a forgotten village in northern Mexico. Dawn in Tierra Salada didn't arrive with promises. It poured slow and golden over the arid hills like thick honey on hard bread, bringing with it the same ritual as always, the sound of roosters tearing through silence, the creaking of old wood under the weight of night dew and the barefoot steps of Esperanza Dolores on the packed earth floor. 21 years she had carried in this world, though her weathered hands and curved back spoke of a life that had lived twice as long. She was the eldest of 7 siblings, the first to wake, the last to sleep, the silent shadow that kept the small Herrera household standing. Don Evaristo, her father, would wake when coffee was already steaming on the table. Doña Remedios, her mother, would open her eyes when the corn was already ground and warm tortillas waited under the cotton cloth. The younger siblings would get up when Esperanza had already swept the patio, fed the chickens and organized the family's few possessions. No one saw her. She was like air, indispensable but invisible. Her feet knew every stone on the path to the well. Her hands knew exactly how much force was needed to lift the buckets without the water spilling. Her eyes, always lowered, had memorized every crack in the ground, every shadow that the adobe houses cast as the sun passed. The village knew her as the Herrera girl, or simply the eldest. Some days, when she crossed paths with the women at the market, she would hear their whispers. Poor thing, so ugly. Who would want her? Their words pierced like thorns, but Esperanza had learned to walk with pain, to carry it like she carried the water buckets, without complaining, without stopping. Her clothing spoke of her place in the world. Dresses inherited. From distant cousins, mended with patches of different fabrics, darned with threads that didn't always match. Her feet, always bare, had hardened so much that she no longer felt the stones. Her hands cracked from work, and bucket ropes told the story of a life dedicated to serving. But there was something in Esperanza that the village didn't see. In the quiet of dawn, when grinding corn, her lips would move, whispering prayers that weren't pleas but conversations. She spoke with God like someone speaks with a close friend, sharing with him the small miracles of the day, the extra egg, the spotted hen had laid, the smile she had drawn from her youngest brother, the way the afternoon light filtered through the window and transformed her humble kitchen into a temple of gold. In those moments her face was transfigured. The lines of fatigue softened her dark eyes, shone with a light that came from within, and her lips, cracked by the sun, curved in a smile that no one else had ever seen. But the village didn't know that. Esperanza. The village only saw the woman who walked with her head down, who responded with monosyllables, who seemed to have resigned herself to being invisible, until Wednesday arrived. Would this be the day when everything would change forever, or would Esperanza continue being just another shadow in Tierra Salada? Wednesdays were market days, and Esperanza carried on her shoulders not only the baskets, with eggs and chickens tied by their feet, but also the weight of averted glances and whispered comments. The path to the market stretched like a carpet of dust under her feet, bordered by cacti that kept the secret of how many silent tears they had witnessed. That morning the air carried the aroma of mesquite flowers and the promise of rain that might never come. Esperanza walked with her accustomed pace, measured and silent, when the sound of hooves against earth made her lift her gaze for the first time in a long while. A man mounted on a dark horse was approaching from the opposite direction. The sunlight, filtering through the acacia branches, created a play of shadows that for a moment made him seem like an apparition. The rider was dark-skinned with skin weathered by sun, and wind, wearing a white shirt that contrasted with the darkness of his skin, and a straw hat that protected eyes that even from a distance seemed different. Esperanza did what she always did, lowered her gaze and stepped aside from the path, waiting for the man to pass without noticing her. But the hooves stopped. "Good morning, miss." The voice was deep, respectful. Esperanza looked up, surprised. The men of the village didn't greet her with such courtesy. Their eyes met for the first time, and something in his gaze disconcerted her. There was no contempt, no pity, no indifference. There was curiosity. "Good morning, sir," she murmured, feeling the words catch in her throat. "Could you tell me if I'm heading right for the San Rafael Ranch? It's my first day here, and although they gave me directions, this place is new to me." Esperanza nodded, pointing east with a timid gesture. "Follow this path until you reach the large mesquite split by lightning. Turn right there, and after the hill, you'll see the ranch houses." The man smiled, and that smile completely transformed his face. "Thank you very much. I'm Ignacio Sebastian Morales. I'm going to work as foreman at the ranch." A silence stretched between them. Esperanza knew she should say her name, but the words remained trapped in her chest. It was the first time in years that someone had introduced themselves to her, that someone seemed to expect her to also introduce herself as an equal. "Esperanza," she finally whispered. "Esperanza." "Dolores Herrera." "Esperanza," he repeated as if savoring the name. A beautiful name for a beautiful morning. Esperanza's heart skipped a beat. No one ever had used the word beautiful in her presence. She felt warmth rise to her cheeks and lowered her gaze again. "Well, Esperanza Dolores Herrera, I hope to encounter you again soon. Have a good day at the market." He spurred his horse gently and rode away, leaving behind a trail of golden dust and something that Esperanza couldn't name. She stood motionless on the path with the baskets in her hands, and her heart beating in a strange and new way. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her, really seen her. The rest of the way to the market, she walked in a kind of reverie. Colors seemed more vivid, aromas more intense. Even the glances of the other women hurt less. There was something new blooming in her chest, something fragile and precious like a sprout after rain. At the market, she sold her eggs and chickens with mechanical efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere. It was on eyes that had looked at her with respect, on a voice that had pronounced her name as if it were important, on a smile that had illuminated the morning. When she returned home, Doña Remedios noticed something different about her. "Why did you take so long, and why do you have that look?" Esperanza didn't know how to explain that. For the first time in 21 years, she felt as if she truly existed. But could this chance encounter mean something more, or had it just been the passing kindness of a stranger? The following days passed like water through fingers, but each one carried with it the secret hope of a new encounter. Esperanza discovered that her feet led her down paths she had never traveled, roads that happened to pass near the San Rafael Ranch. Her daily tasks acquired a different rhythm, as if she were dancing a silent dance that only she knew. The second encounter came on a Friday near the communal well. Esperanza was struggling with the full buckets, feeling how the ropes dug into her already wounded palms, when a shadow fell over the water. "Allow me to help you." It was him, Ignacio Sebastian. Morales, with the same smile she had treasured in her memory like a treasure. Without waiting for an answer, he took one of the buckets, and together they walked toward the Herrera house. The path, which had always seemed endless when she went loaded, became too short. "Have you lived here long in Tierra Salada?" he asked, breaking the silence that for Esperanza no longer felt uncomfortable. "All my life," she answered, surprising herself with how natural her voice sounded. "I was born in that house we're heading to. You must know every corner of this place, every stone, every plant. Sometimes I feel like I'm part of the landscape." Ignacio stopped and looked at her. "No one who has inner life is part of the landscape, Esperanza. People aren't stones or plants, they are entire universes." Those words embedded themselves in her heart like seeds in fertile ground. Entire universes. She who had always felt like a drop of water in the desert was. An entire universe for someone. When they reached the house, Doña Remedios was waiting for them in the patio, arms crossed, and an expression that Esperanza knew well. It was the look she reserved for situations she considered inappropriate. "Esperanza, who is this gentleman?" "I'm Ignacio Sebastian Morales, ma'am. The new foreman at San Rafael Ranch. I just helped your daughter with the buckets." Doña Remedios evaluated the man from head to toe, looking for something that would confirm her suspicions. "Very kind of you, Señor Morales. Esperanza, come inside to prepare the food." It was an abrupt farewell, but Ignacio said goodbye with the same courtesy as always. "Have a good day. Esperanza, it was a pleasure to see you again." That night, while grinding corn for the next day's tortillas, Esperanza heard her parents' whispers from the adjoining room. "I don't like this at all, Evaristo. What could a man like that want with our Esperanza?" "Maybe it was just courtesy, woman. Don't get ahead of yourself. Men aren't courteous without reason, and Esperanza, you know how she is. She's not used to these things. She might get her hopes up." Esperanza clenched her teeth and continued grinding. Her mother's words hurt her, but no longer with the same intensity as before. She had something new to think about, something that protected her like an invisible cloak. The third encounter was the most revealing. Esperanza had gone to the market early when there was still dew on the cactus leaves and found him buying supplies for the ranch. This time it was he who saw her first. "Esperanza, what a joy to find you." He approached with a naturalness she admired. In her world, every gesture had to be measured, every word weighed, but Ignacio moved with a freedom she envied. "How is your work at the ranch?" she dared to ask. "Well, though I'm still learning the customs here. Don Cayetano is a fair boss, and the workers are good men, but—" He paused, as if deciding whether he should continue. "Sometimes I feel like something is missing. As if I'm waiting for something that hasn't arrived yet." Their eyes met, and in that moment Esperanza knew there was no turning back. She had crossed an invisible line, had entered a new and dangerous territory where hearts spoke without permission. "Señor Morales," she began to say, but he interrupted her gently. "Ignacio, just Ignacio." "Ignacio," she repeated, feeling how the name settled in her mouth as if it had been born to pronounce it. "People will talk. And what will they say? That you're lowering yourself, that I'm not for a man like you." Ignacio took a step closer. They were in the middle of the market, surrounded by people, but Esperanza felt as if they were alone in the world. "Esperanza, I'm not the one to decide who I lower or elevate myself with. My heart decides that, and my heart tells me that you are an extraordinary woman who has been invisible for too long." Tears threatened to betray her, but she held them back. She had learned since childhood that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, just allow me to get to know you better, allow me to really see you." In that moment, Esperanza made the most courageous decision of her life. She decided to allow herself to be seen. But would she be prepared for the consequences that this new world of gazes and sincere words would bring? The following weeks passed like a river seeking its bed. The encounters between Esperanza and Ignacio became more frequent, more natural, as if destiny had decided to weave their paths into a single thread. He would appear to help her with shopping, to walk with her when she returned from the well, to exchange words that filled the empty spaces that Esperanza didn't know existed in her life. The village didn't take long to notice. Tongues moved like mill blades grinding Esperanza's fragile happiness, with comments that reached her ears, fragmented but venomous. "Did you see, there goes the Herrera girl with the new foreman? That man must be crazy or blind. Poor thing, he doesn't know the women here. He'll realize soon enough." Doña Mercedes the baker had turned her business into the center of gossip operations. Every morning when the women went to buy bread, the inevitable topic arose like yeast in warm dough. "I just don't understand what he can see in her," said one. "Men sometimes get confused with the first woman who treats them well," added another. "It will pass. It's a matter of time." But Esperanza had stopped caring so much. She had something more precious to think about: conversations with Ignacio, which had begun to touch on topics that no one else had ever asked her about. He asked about her dreams, about her fears, about the thoughts that visited her during the long hours of silent work. One October afternoon, when the air began to bring promises of rain, Ignacio came to fetch her later than usual. The sun had already hidden behind the hills, and the first stars were beginning to twinkle like curious children's eyes. "Esperanza, could we walk a little?" She nodded, even though she knew that walking with a man after nightfall would be the topic of conversation in the village for weeks. She wrapped herself in her finest shawl, a gift from her godmother, that she reserved for special occasions, and they left together along the path that led to the abandoned chapel. They walked in silence at first, but it was a different silence from those Esperanza knew. It wasn't the heavy silence of resignation, but the light silence of two people who felt comfortable simply being together. "Esperanza," Ignacio finally said, stopping under a mesquite whose branches extended like protective arms. "I need to tell you something, and I hope you'll listen with an open heart." Esperanza's heart began to beat so hard she feared he might hear it. Under the starlight, Ignacio's face looked serious but not severe. It was the seriousness of someone about to reveal an important truth. "I've been in this village for weeks, and at first everything seemed the same as any other place I'd been. But since the day I met you, everything changed. I can't explain it with precise words because words sometimes aren't enough to describe what the soul feels." Esperanza felt her legs trembling and leaned slightly against the tree trunk. "There's something about you that makes me want to be a better man. Something in your way of speaking, of moving, of looking at the world. You have a nobility that can't be learned, that can't be bought, that one simply is." The tears she had held back for weeks began to flow without permission. Ignacio affirmed her. "I'm not what you think. I'm just a poor woman without education, without beauty, without—" He approached, and with infinite delicacy dried a tear from her cheek with the back of his hand. "You are exactly what I see. And what I see is a woman with the most beautiful heart I've known. I don't care what the village says, I don't care what others think. I only care what my heart feels, and my heart tells me I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you." Esperanza closed her eyes, feeling the world spinning around her like a top. "What are you saying to me?" "I'm saying I love you, Esperanza Dolores Herrera. I love you with a certainty I didn't know existed, and if you permit me, I want to ask your father for your hand in marriage." The silence that followed was the longest of Esperanza's life. It was as if time had stopped to allow her to assimilate these words that would change everything forever. When she finally opened her eyes, she found him looking at her with an intensity that made her feel for the first time in her life completely visible. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Ignacio, yes to everything." Under the starry vault of Tierra Salada, two hearts sealed a pact that would challenge the expectations of an entire village. But would Don Evaristo be prepared to receive a request that no one had ever imagined? The Herrera house had never received such a formal visit. Don Evaristo had put on his least patched shirt, Doña Remedios had swept the patio 3 times, and Esperanza had ground the corn with a nervousness that made her hands tremble like leaves in the wind. Ignacio arrived at nightfall on Sunday, mounted on his horse and dressed in clothes that spoke of respect and serious intentions. He wore a new hat and a white shirt that shone against his dark skin like the moon against the night sky. In his hands he carried a small bouquet of wildflowers he had cut on his way to the house. Don Evaristo received him in the patio with the gravity the occasion deserved. Esperanza's younger siblings peeked through the doors like curious little birds, and Doña Remedios maintained a prudent distance close enough to hear far enough to pretend she wasn't. "Don Evaristo," Ignacio began removing his hat in a sign of respect. "I come tonight because I have something important to ask you." "I'm listening, young man." "I am Ignacio Sebastian Morales Foreman at San Rafael Ranch. I work under the orders of Don Cayetano Vasquez, who can give references about my character and my work. I come from a humble but honorable family, and although I don't have great wealth, I do have stable work and a sincere heart." Don Evaristo nodded slowly. He had expected this conversation since the rumors in the village began, but hearing it firsthand gave it a different dimension. "And what do you want to ask me, Señor Morales?" Ignacio took a deep breath, like someone preparing to make the most important leap of his life. I want to ask for your daughter Esperanza's hand in marriage. The silence that followed was so dense, it seemed to have solidified in the air. From the kitchen, the sound of a plate falling from Doña Remedios's hands could be heard. Don Evaristo looked at Ignacio for a long moment, as if evaluating not only his words, but his entire soul. "Are you sure of what you ask, young man Esperanza? Fea's a good girl, hard-working and obedient, but—" He paused, searching for the right words. "She's not what you'd call a woman fortunate in matters of— well, you understand." Doña Remedios, unable to contain herself any longer, approached the group. "Señor Morales, with all respect, but you don't know Esperanza well. She has no dowry, no education, doesn't come from a family of name. She's a simple girl for work. I'm sure a man like you could aspire to much more." Ignacio listened patiently, but when Doña Remedios finished, his response came firm and clear. "Doña Remedios, Don Evaristo, I understand your concerns and I respect them. But allow me to tell you what I see in Esperanza. I see a woman with a noble heart, with a silent strength. That is more valuable than any dowry. I see someone who has dedicated her life to serving her family, who works without complaining, who finds beauty in simple things. I see a genuine goodness that can't be faked or bought." He paused, looking toward the door, where he knew Esperanza was listening. "I'm not looking for a woman with education who will impress me with elegant words. I'm looking for a companion who understands the value of work, of sacrifice, of true love. And all of that I find in Esperanza." Don Evaristo felt something move in his chest. He had never heard anyone describe his eldest daughter with such certainty and respect. "And if I told you that Esperanza comes with more responsibilities than benefits, she takes care of this house of her siblings. She's the one who keeps everything running. Then I would tell you that I understand the responsibilities and that I'm willing to help with them. I'm not coming to take a daughter. From you I'm coming to offer you a son who will help with the family burdens." It was then that Esperanza appeared in the patio. She had been listening from the door with her heart beating so hard she feared it would leap from her chest. Seeing Ignacio defending not only his right to love her, but the value he saw in her, she knew she had found something she didn't know she was looking for. "Papa," she said in a voice that everyone noticed was firmer than usual, "if you agree, I accept Señor Morales's proposal." Don Evaristo looked at his daughter, then at Ignacio, and finally at his wife. In Esperanza's eyes, he saw something he had never seen before, real hope, the kind that comes when someone sees you exactly as you are and decides that's enough. "Señor Morales," he finally said, "if you're sure of your decision and if my daughter agrees, then you have my blessing." Ignacio approached Esperanza and in front of the entire family took from his pocket a simple silver ring with a small blue stone. "Esperanza Dolores Herrera, will you be my wife?" "Yes," she answered, and for the first time in 21 years, her voice sounded like it belonged to someone who knew exactly who she was. When Ignacio slipped the ring onto her finger, Esperanza felt that she wasn't only committing to a man, but to a version of herself that she had never known existed. But would the village be prepared for a wedding that challenged all their expectations? 3 weeks after the formal request, Tierra Salada was preparing to witness something no one had imagined, the marriage of the invisible Esperanza Herrera to the respected foreman Ignacio Morales. The entire village buzzed with comments ranging from incredulity to poorly disguised envy. The church in the neighboring village San Isidro had become the scene of whispers and curious glances. Doña Mercedes had closed her bakery early so as not to miss a single detail, and even Don Cipriano the blacksmith had interrupted his work to attend what everyone considered the event of the year. Esperanza had awakened before dawn, not out of habit this time, but from a mixture of nerves and happiness that had her floating between reality and dream. Doña Remedios, who had spent days battling between worry and pride, had finally decided that, if her daughter was going to get married, it would be with the dignity she deserved. Esperanza's dress was the result of a collective miracle. Her godmother had donated meters of white fabric she had been saving for a special occasion. Her cousins had contributed lace and ribbons, and Doña Carmen, the village seamstress, had worked entire days without charging to create something that would do justice to the occasion. When Esperanza looked at herself in the small mirror in her room, she saw a woman she didn't completely recognize. The dress, though simple, gave her an elegance she had never believed she possessed. Doña Remedios had lent her her silver earrings. The only valuable ones she had and her younger sisters had woven wildflowers into her hair. But the detail that moved her most was Ignacio's gift, a pair of leather shoes, the first closed shoes she would own in her life. When she put them on, she felt as if she were walking on clouds. The ceremony was simple but solemn. Father Guadalupe, who had baptized Esperanza 21 years earlier, received her with a smile that mixed surprise and blessing. Ignacio arrived mounted on his horse, dressed in a dark suit he had managed to borrow from Don Cayetano, his boss, who had insisted on being one of the witnesses. When Esperanza entered the church on her father's arm, a murmur ran through the pews. It wasn't the murmur of accustomed contempt, but something different, amazement. The woman walking toward the altar wasn't the same one they had seen for years, carrying buckets and selling eggs. There was something in her posture, in the way she held her head up, that spoke of a profound transformation. Ignacio was waiting for her at the foot of the altar, and when their eyes met, the rest of the world simply disappeared. The whispers didn't matter. The stares didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this moment when two souls decided to walk the rest of the path together. Ignacio Sebastián Morales, do you take Esperanza Dolores Herrera as your wife? Asked Father Guadalupe. Yes, I do, Ignacio answered with a voice that reached the last corner of the church. Esperanza Dolores Herrera, do you take Ignacio Sebastián Morales as your husband? Yes, I do, Esperanza answered, and this time her voice sounded firm and clear, as if she had been waiting all her life to pronounce those words. When they exchanged rings, when the priest pronounced the words that united them before God, and man Esperanza felt that she wasn't only marrying Ignacio, but being born again. The celebration was held in the patio of the Herrera house under a sky that had decided to gift them with a perfect afternoon. The improvised tables filled with food that each family had contributed, mole prepared by Doña Esperanza, the godmother tamales made by the cousins, fresh water and newly made tortillas. Don Cipriano had brought his guitar, and for the first time in years, Tierra Salada filled with music and laughter. But the most memorable moment came when Ignacio asked for silence and addressed all those present. I want to thank everyone for accompanying us on this special day. I know many wondered what I see in Esperanza, and today I want to tell you what I see. I see the most courageous woman I know, who lived 21 years serving others without asking for anything in return. I see someone who finds beauty where others only see routine, who gives love where others give indifference. I see my companion, my equal, my other half. Ignacio's words fell over the patio like rain on dry earth. Some of those present felt shame, remembering their past comments. Others felt admiration for the first time, for the woman they had ignored for years. When it came time to leave for their new home, Esperanza said goodbye to her family with tears that were half sadness, half joy. She climbed into the cart that Ignacio had prepared, and as they moved away from the only house she had known, she felt that she wasn't losing a home, but gaining a future. The house Ignacio had prepared at the ranch was small but cozy. He had painted the walls, put new curtains on the windows, and filled the corners with small details that spoke of hope and care. That night, when they were alone for the first time as husband and wife, Esperanza felt that her entire previous life had been just preparation for this moment, the moment when she could finally be herself, completely, without fear and without apologies. Are you happy, Señora Morales? Ignacio asked her, using her new surname for the first time. Happier than I ever imagined I could be, she answered, and for the first time in her life, those words were completely true. But could this happiness survive the challenges that were yet to come, or would the world find a way to remind them what their supposed place was? Married life brought with it a different rhythm, a new music that Esperanza learned to dance day by day. The small house at the ranch became a universe where each morning brought small discoveries, and where each evening closed with the certainty that she had found her place in the world. Ignacio would rise with the sun to supervise the ranch work, but he always found time for small gestures that filled Esperanza's heart coffee served before she was fully awake, wildflowers placed in a jar on the table, a smile that greeted her every time she returned from the village. Esperanza, for her part, had transformed the house into a home. Her hands, accustomed to hard work, found new ways to express love: curtains embroidered with colored threads, a small but prosperous garden where peppers and aromatic herbs grew, meals prepared with simple ingredients, but seasoned with a happiness that could be tasted. The mornings passed in synchronized dance. While Ignacio prepared for work, Esperanza organized the day's tasks. But there was something different about these chores now. They had their own purpose. They weren't just survival, but construction of something greater. One December afternoon, when the air brought promises of Christmas festivities, Ignacio arrived with a proposal that would forever change Esperanza's relationship with the ranch. "Don Cayetano wants to speak with you," he told her with a mysterious smile that awakened her curiosity. "With me? Why would the boss want to speak with me? You'll have to ask him yourself, but I can tell you it's something good." The next day, Esperanza put on her most presentable dress and walked to the main house of the ranch. She had never been so close to Don Cayetano Vasquez, an older man with a graying beard and penetrating eyes, who had a reputation for being fair but demanding. "Señora Morales," he received her with a courtesy that surprised her. "Your husband told me you have good ideas for improving the lives of the ranch workers." Esperanza blushed. Indeed, she had shared with Ignacio some observations about how certain tasks could be better organized, how resources could be better utilized, how the ranch families could feel more cared for. "They were just comments, sir. I didn't intend to—" "Don't apologize for having good ideas, Señora. I've thought a lot about what Ignacio told me, and I'd like you to take charge of organizing a community garden here at the ranch, something where all the families can participate and benefit." Esperanza felt her heart accelerate. She had never had a responsibility beyond her own home, and now they were asking her to lead a project for the entire ranch community. "I don't know if I'm prepared for something like that, sir." "Señora Morales, I've observed how you transformed your small house, how you manage your garden, how you speak with the other ranch women. You have something that can't be taught. You know how to make things grow, not just plants, but people too." Those words embedded themselves in Esperanza's soul like seeds in fertile ground. Someone had seen capacities in her that she didn't even know she had. "If you believe I can do it, I'll try." The community garden project became Esperanza's passion. She organized the ranch women, distributed tasks according to each one's abilities, and little by little saw growing not only the plants, but something more precious, a sense of community that hadn't existed before. The afternoons filled with the laughter of women working together, children playing among the furrows, men arriving from work to find not only fresh food, but a space where their families flourished. But the deepest change was experienced by Esperanza herself. In the evenings when Ignacio returned from work, she would tell him about the day's progress with an enthusiasm that surprised her. She spoke of future plans, ideas for expanding the project, dreams she hadn't dared to have before. "Do you know what I like most about all this?" she told him one night as they dined by candlelight. "What?" "That for the first time in my life, when someone asks who did this, the answer is Esperanza. Not the Herrera daughter or Ignacio's wife, just Esperanza." Ignacio took her hand across the table. "It was always just Esperanza for me. It's beautiful that now you see it too." That night, as she listened to her husband's peaceful breathing beside her, Esperanza reflected on the months that had passed. She had learned that love wasn't only feeling loved, but also discovering that she had much love to give. She had learned that happiness wasn't the absence of work, but finding work that gave meaning to life. She had learned above all that she had spent 21 years being invisible, not because others didn't see her, but because she herself hadn't allowed herself to be seen. But what would happen when news arrived that would test this new version of herself? She had discovered winter had arrived gently in Tierra Salada, bringing with it longer nights and days that invited reflection. Esperanza had fallen into a happy routine that included household tasks, caring for the community garden, and peaceful afternoons with Ignacio, who had begun teaching her to read with greater fluency, using books he managed to borrow from the main house. Everything seemed perfect until the afternoon, when an unknown rider arrived at the ranch asking for Ignacio Sebastián Morales. Esperanza was in the garden when she saw her husband speaking with the visitor, an elegantly dressed man who rode a black horse that seemed to have cost more money than she had seen in her entire life. The conversation was brief, but she noticed that Ignacio received something from the man, a sealed letter, that he quickly put in his pocket. That night during dinner, Ignacio was quieter than usual. He answered her questions with monosyllables, and his gaze seemed lost in thoughts he didn't share. Esperanza, who had learned to read her husband's silences, like someone reads signs in the sky before rain, knew something had changed. "Who was the man who came looking for you today?" she finally asked when she could no longer contain her curiosity. Ignacio raised his gaze from his plate as if awakening from a deep dream. "A messenger," he answered, but in his voice there was something Esperanza hadn't heard before, a tension that spoke of hidden secrets. "A messenger from whom? From my family." "I didn't know you had family you maintained correspondence with." "It's complicated, Esperanza. There are things about my past I didn't tell you because I thought they weren't necessary, that I had left all that behind." A strange cold settled in Esperanza's stomach. In all the months they had been married, Ignacio had been completely transparent, with her sharing stories of his childhood, his previous jobs, his dreams and fears. Knowing there were parts of his life he had decided to keep secret hurt her in a way she didn't know how to name. What kind of things? Ignacio got up from the table and walked to the window, turning his back to her. In the posture of his shoulders, Esperanza read the weight of something he had been carrying alone. "My full name is Ignacio Sebastián Morales, Ty Mendoza." The surname Mendoza resonated in Esperanza's ears like the echo of a bell. Even in Tierra Salada, a place distant from the big cities, the Mendoza name was known. They were one of the most powerful families in the region, owners of ranches that extended for thousands of hectares, with political and social influence that reached the capital. "Mendoza," she whispered, feeling the world shift under her feet. "I am the unrecognized son of Rafael Mendoza," Ignacio continued without turning to see her. "My mother was a teacher at one of his properties. She was young, intelligent, beautiful. He was married, powerful, accustomed to taking what he wanted." Esperanza felt her legs trembling and sat back down in her chair. "When my mother became pregnant, he expelled her from the ranch. She returned to her hometown where I was born. We lived in poverty until she died when I was 15. And then for some reason, I never completely understood the Mendoza. Family decided to recognize me. They sent for me, took me to the main ranch, gave me education, fine clothes, a room in the main house. But I was always the bastard, the living reminder of an indiscretion everyone preferred to forget." Ignacio finally turned to her, and in his eyes Esperanza saw a pain that had been hidden all this time. "When I turned 20, I couldn't stand it anymore. One night I left, took only what was rightfully mine, and swore never to return. I've been working as a foreman at different ranches for 5 years, using only my mother's surname, Morales." The silence that followed was thick as honey. Esperanza tried to process all this information, understand what it meant for their marriage, for their life together. "And what does that letter say?" My father died. His legitimate children want me to return to claim an inheritance that, according to law, belongs to me." Esperanza felt something break in her chest. It wasn't only Ignacio's past revelation, but the possibility that this past could snatch away the future they had begun to build together. "Are you going to go?" "I don't know." His voice sounded tired, as if he had been struggling with this decision since receiving the letter. "Part of me wants them to pay for what they did to my mother, for the years of humiliation they made me endure. But another part—" "What does the other part say?" Ignacio approached her and took her hands in his. "The other part says I already have everything I need here with you, that I don't need the Mendoza name or their money to be happy." Esperanza looked into his eyes, searching for the truth behind his words. "But you also have a right to that inheritance. It's yours by right. Rights aren't always worth what it costs to claim them, Esperanza." That night they went to bed without resolving anything, but Esperanza knew something had changed forever. It wasn't only that Ignacio had a more complicated past than she had imagined. but that now there were external forces that could influence the decisions they made about their future. Could the love they had built survive the storms coming from May? A world Esperanza had never known. The following days passed wrapped in a silent tension that had settled in the small house like an uninvited guest. Ignacio fulfilled his responsibilities at the ranch, but Esperanza noticed his mind was elsewhere, fighting demons she couldn't see but could feel. The letter had remained on the kitchen table for 3 days, like a constant reminder of approaching decisions. Esperanza looked at it every time she passed by without daring to touch it, but feeling its presence like a silent threat to the happiness that had cost her so much to achieve. On the 4th day, while Esperanza was working in the community garden, she heard raised voices near the main house. Don Cayetano was speaking with someone in a tone she hadn't heard from him before, firm, almost hostile. "I won't allow them to come to my ranch threatening my employees," the boss was saying. "Don Cayetano, you don't understand the situation." An unknown voice responded, "The Mendozas aren't people to play with. If Ignacio doesn't respond soon to our call, we'll come for him." Esperanza felt her heart stop. She approached stealthily, hiding behind a tree to hear better. "And with what right?" Don Cayetano asked. "Ignacio Morales is a free man, works for me by his own will, and while he's on my property, he's under my protection." "It's Ignacio Morales y Mendoza," the visitor corrected. "And he's the legitimate heir to a considerable fortune. His family has the right to claim him." "His family abandoned him when he was a child. Now that they need something from him, they come to claim him. How convenient." Esperanza recognized the visitor's voice. It was the same elegant man who had brought the letter days ago. But this time he wasn't coming just as a messenger, but as an envoy with a more threatening purpose. That afternoon, when Ignacio returned from work, he found Esperanza sitting in the kitchen with the letter in her hands. "I opened it," she said, without preamble. "I know I had no right, but I needed to understand what's happening." Ignacio sat across from her without reproaching the intrusion. "And what do you think now that you know everything? I think they're pressuring you to return, not because they love you or miss you, but because they need you to sign documents to inherit lands. They want to control." Ignacio smiled sadly. His wife had understood in minutes what had taken him days to process. "You're more intelligent than I was at your age." "It's not intelligence, it's survival. I've lived my whole life seeing how powerful people use common people for their purposes." Esperanza paused, took a deep breath. "The difference is that now, you have the power to choose." "And what do you think I should choose?" "I think you should go." The answer surprised Ignacio. "What?" "You should go, claim what's yours, and then decide what to do with it. But you shouldn't run away." "Esperanza, if I go, it's possible I can't come back the same way. The Mendozas will want me to stay to take my place in the family, to behave like one of them." "And what do you want?" Ignacio took his wife's hands. "I want to stay here with you, live our simple life, work our piece of land, raise our children far from all that complication. But you can't stay hidden forever. They've already come once and they'll keep coming. It's better to face this now, on your terms, than to wait for them to decide when and how." That night, they made a decision that would change everything. Ignacio would go to the Mendoza ranch, but not alone. Esperanza would accompany him. "You don't have to do this," he told her. "You can stay here where you're safe, where they know and respect you." "Ignacio Sebastián Morales y Mendoza," she said, using his full name for the first time. "I didn't marry you for the easy times. I married you for everything that would come. If you go, I go with you." "Esperanza, they won't understand." "What you mean to me? They'll see you as someone who isn't at my level. Let them see me however they want. I know who I am, you know who I am, and that's all that matters." 3 days later, Don Cayetano said goodbye to them in the main house patio with a mixture of pride and concern. "Go with God," he told them, "and remember you'll always have a place here no matter what happens there." As the cart moved away from San Rafael Ranch, Esperanza felt they weren't only traveling to a distant ranch, but to an uncertain future, where they would have to decide who they wanted to be when the world offered them the possibility of being different. But would she be prepared to face a family that had rejected Ignacio when they needed him, and now claimed him when it was convenient? The San Isidro ranch stretched before them like a miniature city. Esperanza had never seen such opulence together. The main house was a 3-story palace with wrought-iron balconies, gardens that seemed cut with precision scissors, and a central fountain where water danced to melodies only the wind knew. As their modest cart approached along the cobblestone path, Esperanza felt that each step of the horse took her further from the world she knew. The workers they saw passing looked at them with poorly disguised curiosity, and some women hanging clothes near the employees' houses stopped to observe the couple arriving. At the main entrance, a middle-aged man was waiting for them, dressed in fine but sober clothing, whom Esperanza immediately identified as someone important by the way others moved around him. "Ignacio," the man said, approaching with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've grown a lot since the last time I saw you." "Ricardo," Ignacio responded, getting down from the cart with visible tension in his shoulders. "You look well. And this must be your wife," Ricardo said, directing his attention to Esperanza with formal courtesy that she recognized as the kind of kindness used with guests you don't plan to invite again. "Esperanza Dolores Morales," she introduced herself, consciously using Ignacio's maiden surname, not the Mendoza's. "Welcome to San Isidro. I'm Ricardo Mendoza, Ignacio's brother, on our father's side, of course." The "of course" hung in the air like an unnecessary explanation that revealed exactly the family's attitude toward Ignacio's legitimacy. They led them through patios where bougainvillea created colorful ceilings, past corridors with tiles that told stories of past eras, until they reached a room that was larger than the entire house where Esperanza had grown up. There 2 other men were waiting, Eduardo, the older brother, and an older man they introduced as Don Aurelio, the family lawyer. "Ignacio," Eduardo began without preamble, "we deeply regret our father's death. We know relations between you were complicated, but he remembered you in his will." "What does the will say?" Ignacio asked directly. Don Aurelio opened a file of documents. "He leaves you 1/5 of the family properties, including land, cattle, and some properties in the city. It's a considerable inheritance." Esperanza saw how Ignacio processed this information. 1/5 of what they saw around them would be a fortune that would change their lives forever. "And what's the condition?" Ignacio asked, because he had learned that in the world of the powerful there were always conditions. "That you return to the family," Ricardo said. "That you officially take the Mendoza surname, that you marry in the church with a ceremony appropriate for your social position, and that you take charge of administrating the northern properties." Esperanza felt something break in her chest. The phrase "marry in the church with an appropriate ceremony" clearly implied that their current marriage wasn't considered valid by this family. "I'm already married," Ignacio said firmly. "Yes, we heard," Eduardo responded with a condescending smile. "But we understand it was a precipitated decision made when you were living in difficult circumstances. Now that you can take your legitimate place in society, it's natural that you'd want to correct certain errors." "Errors?" Ignacio's voice had hardened. "Ignacio, be reasonable," Ricardo intervened. "Your wife seems like a charming woman. I'm sure she'll find a good man of her own social class. We can help her with a generous dowry to secure her future." Esperanza felt the words hit her like stones. It wasn't that she hadn't anticipated this attitude, but hearing it expressed so openly, so casually, as if she were an obstacle that could be bought and removed, filled her with an indignation she had never felt. "A dowry?" she asked, speaking for the first time since they had arrived. "As if I were merchandise to be exchanged." The 3 men looked at her surprised. Clearly they hadn't expected her to participate in the conversation. "Señora Herrera, right," Eduardo said. "I understand this is difficult to accept, but you must understand that Ignacio has family responsibilities that go beyond personal feelings." "I understand perfectly," Esperanza responded, with a calm that surprised even her. "I understand that you want Ignacio's work, his intelligence, his capacity, but without the commitment of really accepting him as a brother. I understand that you need his signatures to manage the properties, but you don't want a woman like me present at your social gatherings." The silence that followed was tense, as a violin string about to break. "It's nothing personal," Ricardo said, uncomfortable. "Everything is personal when you're talking about people's lives," Esperanza responded. "And Ignacio's life includes mine, whether you like it or not." Ignacio, who had been listening in silence, stood up. "I need time to think about all this. Can we stay tonight and give an answer tomorrow?" "Of course," Eduardo said. "We prepared rooms for you, separate ones naturally, until the situation is resolved." As they were led to the guest rooms, Esperanza wondered if they had come to claim an inheritance or to fight for Ignacio's right to decide his own destiny. But would Ignacio have the strength to reject a world of wealth and power for love of a woman that same world considered inferior? The night at San Isidro passed slowly and heavily. Esperanza had slept little in the room they assigned her as space, more luxurious than any place she had been, but that felt cold despite the fine wool blankets. Through the windows came the aroma of perfectly tended gardens, but also the weight of decisions the morning would bring. She woke early out of habit more than rest, and found a maid who brought her warm water to wash, and a dress that they explained would be more appropriate for breakfast with the family. The dress was beautiful, of fine fabric and elegant cut, but Esperanza felt like she was wearing a costume. The dining room of the main house was an intimidating hall with a table that could seat 20 people. That morning, only Eduardo, Ricardo and Don Aurelio were waiting along with an older woman they introduced as Doña Catalina, a cousin's widow who lived at the ranch and served as hostess on formal occasions. "Good morning, dear," Doña Catalina greeted Esperanza with a kindness that seemed genuine. "I hope you rested well." "Very well, thank you," Esperanza lied politely. Ignacio arrived a few minutes later, and Esperanza immediately noticed there was something different in his way of walking in, how he held his shoulders. He seemed to have made a decision during the night. Breakfast passed with superficial conversation about the weather crops and local gossip, but everyone knew it was just the prelude to the important conversation. Finally, Eduardo broke the ice. "Ignacio, we hope you've considered our proposal carefully. It's an opportunity that doesn't present itself twice." "I've considered it," Ignacio responded, "and I've decided." At that moment, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another man, older, distinguished, with the kind of presence that immediately filled any room he entered. "Forgive the interruption," the newcomer said, "but I heard we had special visitors." Eduardo stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "Don Cayetano, we didn't expect—" "Don Cayetano Vasquez," the man introduced himself directly to Esperanza and Ignacio. "I'm your neighbor owner of San Rafael Ranch." Esperanza felt a mixture of relief and surprise. Their boss had come here, but why? "I've come because I have something important to say in this conversation," Don Cayetano continued. "Something I believe everyone should know before making irreversible decisions." He addressed Esperanza directly. "Señora Morales, your maiden name was Herrera." "Yes, sir," she answered, confused. "And your parents are Evaristo Herrera and Remedios." "Herrera?" "Yes." Don Cayetano smiled, but it was a smile loaded with meaning. "Then I need to tell you a story that has been a secret for 21 years. The silence in the dining room became absolute. 21 years ago, my sister Soledad fell in love with a man from the village. A good, hard-working man, but not of our social class. My father strongly opposed the relationship and sent Soledad to a convent in the capital, hoping she would forget that foolishness. Esperanza felt the world begin to spin strangely. But Soledad was already pregnant. She gave birth in secret. At the convent, and my father, to avoid scandal, arranged for the girl to be given up for adoption to a trusted family from the village. The words reached Esperanza's ears like distant echoes. That family was the Herreras. That girl was you, Esperanza. The silence that followed was so complete, you could hear flies buzzing near the window. Esperanza felt all the certainties of her life crumble and rebuild in a completely different pattern. "Are you saying that Esperanza is—" Ricardo began. "I'm saying that Esperanza Dolores Herrera is my niece. She's a Vasquez by blood, with as much right to carry that surname as any of you have to carry Mendoza." Eduardo and Ricardo looked at each other, clearly shaken by this revelation. "Do you have proof of this?" Don Aurelio asked. "I have the original birth certificate, the convent documents, and the testimony of Remedios Herrera, who confirmed the entire story when I contacted her years ago. I always knew who Esperanza was, but I respected my father's wish to keep the secret while he lived." Don Cayetano turned to Esperanza, who had remained silent, processing information that changed everything she believed she knew about herself. "Esperanza, your biological mother was an extraordinary woman. Intelligent, brave, compassionate. She died 5 years ago at the convent, but she never stopped asking about you. She loved you until the last day of her life." The tears Esperanza had held back since arriving at San Isidro finally flowed, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of a liberation she didn't know she needed. "This changes everything," Eduardo murmured. "It changes nothing in what really matters," Ignacio said, taking Esperanza's hand. "I fell in love with Esperanza when I believed she was the daughter of a poor peasant, and I love her equally now that I know she's the niece of one of the most respected ranchers in the region." Don Cayetano smiled. "But it does change the legal and social circumstances. As a Vasquez, Esperanza has rights to properties, to social recognition, and certainly there's no impediment for her to be married to a Mendoza." Ricardo and Eduardo exchanged glances that spoke of quick calculations and strategies they would have to reconsider. "Esperanza," Don Cayetano said, "I've come to offer you something I should have offered years ago, your legitimate place in the Vasquez family, with everything that implies." For the first time since arriving at San Isidro, Esperanza felt she had control over the situation. But what would she do with these revelations that changed not only her present, but her entire understanding of her past? The following days at San Isidro passed like a whirlwind of revelations, legal documents and conversations that rewrote not only Esperanza and Ignacio's future, but also her understanding of her entire life. Don Cayetano had brought with him a chest full of memories that belonged to Soledad Vasquez, letters she had written, but never sent addressed to the daughter. She had to give up drawings of how she imagined Esperanza would look at different ages, and a diary where she had recorded every piece of news she could get about the girl growing up in the Herrera house. "Your mother loved you from a distance her entire life," Don Cayetano explained as they reviewed these treasures from the past together. "Every year on your birthday she would light a candle and pray for your happiness." Esperanza read some of those letters with tears that were half pain, half healing. Her biological mother had been a cultured, sensitive woman who wrote with a beauty that spoke of nights of loneliness transformed into art. "My dear girl," one of the letters said, "I pray that wherever you are, you know there's a mother who carries you in her heart. I pray you find true love, that you never have to choose between your heart and your duty like I had to." "Why didn't she look for me?" Esperanza asked. "When my father, Don Rafael Mendoza, died when she was free, why didn't she come for me?" "Because you're smarter than that," Don Cayetano responded with a sad smile. "Think, when Rafael died you were already 18. You had a family that loved you and established life. Soledad thought it would be selfish of her to burst into your world to satisfy her own heart." The understanding came slowly but clearly. Her biological mother had made one last sacrifice for her, allowing her to live without the burden of complicated family secrets. Meanwhile, the dynamics in the Mendoza house had changed completely. Eduardo and Ricardo, who had arrived with plans to manipulate Ignacio through his wife's supposed social inferiority, now found themselves facing a woman who had as much pedigree as they did, but with the additional dignity of having forged herself without the help of privileges. "Things are different now," Eduardo admitted during a private conversation with Ignacio. "If Esperanza is a Vasquez, then there's no social objection to your marriage." "There shouldn't be objection with or without a surname," Ignacio responded firmly. "A person's worth isn't measured by their blood." Of course, Eduardo said. But Ignacio knew his brother had simply changed strategy, not fundamental values. The proposal that emerged after several days of negotiations was complex, but generous. Ignacio would officially accept the Mendoza surname and his inheritance, but would maintain his primary residence at San Rafael Ranch, working as a partner with Don Cayetano in expanding operations. Esperanza would be officially recognized as a Vasquez and inherit a substantial portion of that family's properties. But the most important decision came from Esperanza herself. "I accept the recognition and inheritance," she announced during a family meeting, but with conditions. The men looked at each other, surprised that she was setting conditions. "I want the properties that correspond to me to become cooperatives for the families who work them. I want to establish schools, medical dispensaries, and programs that help people prosper, not just survive." "That's very generous," Ricardo said carefully, "but also very radical." "It's not radical," Esperanza responded. "It's fair. I lived 22 years knowing what it's like not to have opportunities. Now that I have the power to create opportunities for others, that's exactly what I'm going to do." Don Cayetano smiled with pride. "You're the living image of your mother. She would have done something like this too." That night, when they were finally alone in their room, Ignacio embraced Esperanza. "Are you sure about all these decisions? It's a lot of change at once." "Ignacio, all my life I was invisible because people decided I wasn't worth seeing. Now that I know I have the power to make others feel visible, I can't waste it." "I love you," he told her. "I loved you when you were Esperanza Herrera. I love you as Esperanza Vasquez, and I'll love you no matter what other surnames we decide to use. And I love you. Not because now I'm your equal in papers and surnames, but because I always was in the only thing that really matters in the heart." As they fell asleep that night, Esperanza reflected on everything that had changed. She had come to San Isidro feeling like she had to defend herself from a world that rejected her, and she was leaving with the understanding that that world had never had the real power to define who she was. She had been reborn twice, first when Ignacio saw her as she really was, and now when she discovered she had the strength to change the world for others who felt invisible like she had felt. But would she have the wisdom and strength to handle the power she had just inherited? 3 years had passed since that revelation at San Isidro, and the world around Esperanza had changed in ways she never could have imagined. It was 1882, and the small region she had once known only as a collection of scattered ranches and villages had become something people from other places came to study. San Rafael Ranch had expanded, but not in the traditional way. Instead of simply growing in land and cattle, it had grown in social innovation. Esperanza had fulfilled her promise to create opportunities, and the results were visible in every corner of the property. She walked that morning through what they now called the Big School, an adobe building that had been built with community work and housed not only classrooms for children, but also night classes for adults. The voices of students mixed with the morning wind, creating a symphony of hope that still moved her every time she heard it. "Señora Esperanza." Professor Elena greeted her, a young woman who had come from the capital specifically to work on this project. "The results from the first group that took the official exam arrived yesterday. Everyone passed." Esperanza smiled. This group consisted of adults who had never had the opportunity to learn to read properly, including some of the men who had worked at the ranch for decades. "And Don Evaristo?" she asked, referring to her adoptive father, who at 50 had decided it was never too late to learn. "Don Evaristo got the highest score," Elena responded with a smile. "He says he wants to learn numbers now to better keep accounts for his small business." Don Evaristo's small business was another of the changes that had transformed the region. With the initial capital Esperanza had provided, families had started cooperatives, one for textiles, managed mainly by women, another for agricultural products, and a third for crafts that were now sold as far as the capital. As she walked to the medical dispensary, Esperanza stopped to observe the construction of what would be the new house for her and Ignacio. It wasn't as large as the main houses of traditional ranches, but it was spacious and designed to receive the visitors who arrived, constantly journalists who wanted to write about the social experiment, government officials who came to study the methods, and other ranchers who wanted to understand how one could be prosperous and socially responsible at the same time. "Good morning, Senora." Dr. Martinez greeted her, a young man who had agreed to come work at the ranch after finishing his studies in the capital. "I have news I think will make you happy." "What news?" "The infant mortality rates in the region have dropped 40% since we opened the dispensary, and we haven't had a single case of cholera this year. Esperanza felt deep satisfaction. These figures represented saved lives, families that wouldn't have to suffer preventable losses. And how are our medicine reserves? Good, thanks to the agreement with the capital pharmacy. But more importantly, several of the women are already trained to handle births and basic care. We're creating a network of knowledge that will last much longer than any individual doctor. That afternoon, Esperanza headed to the house, where she knew she would find Ignacio, the administrative office they had established to coordinate all the expanded ranch operations. She found him reviewing reports with Don Cayetano, who had aged in these 3 years, but had gained new vitality, seeing his ideas become reality. "How are the numbers?" Esperanza asked, looking over her husband's shoulder at the accounting books. "Better than we ever imagined," Don Cayetano responded. "Not only are we profitable, but we're generating more income per capita than any other operation in the region, which proves that taking good care of people is good business," Ignacio added, "and that women can manage as well as men," Esperanza said with a mischievous smile. "Better in some cases," Don Cayetano admitted. "Your system for organizing the cooperatives is more efficient than anything we've used before." That night, as they dined in their current house, Ignacio gave her news. He had been saving as a surprise. "Esperanza, there's something I need to tell you. Don Cayetano offered me something, and as important." "What?" "He wants us to be full partners in all this, not just administrators but owners. He says when he dies he wants us to be the ones who continue what we've built." Esperanza processed this information carefully. It meant permanent responsibility, but also the security that everything they had created would continue after the current generation. "And what do you want?" "I want what you want. This was your vision from the beginning." Esperanza looked out the window at the lights shining in the ranch family's houses, at the school where classes would continue tomorrow, at the dispensary that operated 24 hours. "I want our daughter to grow up in a world where this is normal," she finally said. Our daughter Esperanza smiled and placed a hand on her belly, where new life was beginning to grow. Socorro Esperanza Morales Vasquez will be born into a very different world than the one we knew. Ignacio embraced her with a happiness that seemed to fill him completely. "Socorro Esperanza. Socorro for your mother, who gave me the man I love. Esperanza for everything we've learned about what that word really means." That night, as they listened to the sounds of a prosperous community settling in for sleep, Esperanza reflected on all the changes these 3 years had brought. She had learned that true power wasn't being seen by others, but helping others see themselves. But could this life model survive the pressures of a world that didn't always reward social innovation? The year 1890 had arrived with changes no one had anticipated. Don Cayetano had died peacefully in his sleep the previous autumn, leaving behind a legacy that Esperanza and Ignacio now had the responsibility to continue. Socorro Esperanza, now a 7-year-old girl with curious eyes and intelligence that reminded one of her mother at that age, ran through the gardens of the new house while her parents received a very special visitor. Don Federico Martinez was a journalist from El Universal, the most important newspaper in the capital, and he had come specifically to write an article about what he called the country's most successful social experiment. "Señora Morales," Don Federico began preparing his notebook. "I've been investigating what you've achieved here, and frankly it seems too good to be true. Could you tell me how a region that 11 years ago was considered poor and backward became a model the national government is studying?" Esperanza, now a 31-year-old woman with the confidence that comes from genuine achievements, smiled as she served fresh water in crystal glasses made at the local cooperative factory. "Don Federico, I don't believe in miracles that appear from nothing. I believe in hard work, education, and giving people real opportunities to prosper." "But the numbers I've seen are extraordinary," the journalist insisted. "Literacy rates of 90% infant mortality, lower than in the capital per capita income, that has grown 300% in a decade. What's the secret?" Ignacio, who had been listening from his desk, approached the conversation. The secret, if you want to call it that, is that we stopped seeing workers as tools and started seeing them as partners. When people have real participation in the results, when their children can study, when they don't have to worry about getting sick without medical care, they work better, innovate more, and create wealth for everyone. And didn't you have resistance from other ranchers, I imagine? This way of operating threatens the traditional model. Esperanza exchanged a glance with Ignacio. Indeed, they had had resistance, even some sabotage attempts, but they had also had unexpected successes. At first there was resistance, Esperanza admitted, but when the results began to speak for themselves, when our products began to have better quality and better prices than those from traditional ranches, some other owners began to adopt our methods. In fact, Ignacio added, last year we helped establish similar programs at 3 neighboring ranches. Cooperation works better than destructive competition. Don Federico was taking notes frantically. Senora Morales, I heard you don't come from a family of landowners. How did a woman with your background develop these ideas? Esperanza smiled. That question always took her to the heart of everything. Don Federico, I lived the first 21 years of my life being invisible. I knew exactly what it felt like when others decided I wasn't worth seeing. When I had the opportunity to change that for other people, I couldn't waste it. Invisible. Invisible for being a woman, for being poor, for not having the formal education others valued. But I discovered that being invisible also gave me an advantage. I could observe how the world really worked, not how the powerful thought it worked. At that moment, Socorro Esperanza burst into the room with red cheeks from running and a smile that lit up the entire room. Mama, Professor Elena says, if I keep studying so well next year, I can start science classes in the capital. Don Federico observed the interaction with interest. Your daughter studies in the capital? No, Esperanza responded with pride. Socorro studies here at our school, but our school now has agreements with the National Institute. Our students can take official exams without having to leave the region. And when I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor and teacher at the same time, Socorro announced, with the absolute confidence of a girl who grew up believing all doors were open to her. Aren't there limitations for being a girl? The journalist asked. Socorro looked at him as if he had said something very strange. Why would there be limitations? My mama manages a ranch, my teacher Elena teaches math better than anyone, and Dr. Martinez serves the entire region. Girls can do everything they want to do. Don Federico looked at Esperanza with new understanding. I see. You didn't only change economic conditions, but social expectations. Exactly, Esperanza responded. When children grow up seeing that hard work and education really take them to better places, when girls grow up seeing women in leadership positions, when families see that caring for their neighbors also cares for themselves, then everything changes. That afternoon, Don Federico toured the property with growing amazement. He saw the school where boys and girls studied together, the library, that was also a community center, the cooperatives where decisions were made in democratic assemblies, the dispensary where anyone was served regardless of their ability to pay. But the moment that most impacted him was when, during a textile cooperative meeting, he saw Esperanza presiding over a discussion about profit distribution. She wasn't a benevolent rancher distributing charity, but an equal partner, discussing with other partners how to maximize common benefit. Senora Morales, he said at the end of the day, I have to ask you a personal question. You have power now, wealth, respect. Aren't there days when you feel tempted to enjoy these privileges without carrying so many responsibilities? Esperanza reflected on the question while watching Socorro play with other children in the patio, without distinction of class or origin. Don Federico, for years I felt like the woman no one saw arrive and who didn't need permission to stay. Now I feel like the woman many see departing for the future and who doesn't need permission to take with her all those who want to come. When Don Federico's article was published in the capital 3 weeks later, it bore a title that would become famous: The Invisible Woman, How Esperanza Morales Transformed a Region and Redefined Progress. That night, when Esperanza read the complete article that Don Federico had sent her in advance, she felt a strange and profound emotion. There was her story, but not only as the personal narrative of a woman who had found love, but as the chronicle of a social transformation that had touched hundreds of lives. Senora Morales, the journalist wrote, represents something new in our country, the possibility that progress doesn't require the perpetuation of inequality, but its intelligent elimination. In an era when social changes seem impossible, this woman has demonstrated they are inevitable when the right conditions are given. Ignacio, reading over her shoulder, pointed to a paragraph that had particularly moved them. Observing the children of this region, one realizes they are growing up in a world where the phrase, "you can't because you're a woman," or "you can't because you're poor" simply doesn't exist in their vocabulary. For them, these limitations are as archaic as stories of dragons and princesses in towers. "Do you realize what we accomplished?" Ignacio said that night as they prepared for bed. "What we accomplished," Esperanza corrected. "Nothing would have been possible if you had decided that an invisible woman wasn't worth your time. And nothing would have been possible if you had decided to keep being invisible when you had the opportunity to be seen." Socorro, who had supposedly been sleeping in her room, appeared in the doorway in her nightgown. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, my love," Esperanza said, extending her arms. "The journalist man asked me what I wanted to be when I grow up, and I said doctor and teacher. But now I'm thinking, can I also be what you are?" "And what are we?" Ignacio asked, curious about his daughter's perspective. "People who make others feel important." Esperanza hugged Socorro, feeling that in those simple words was contained all the essence of what they had tried to build. "You can be that and everything else that occurs to you, my girl, but above all, you can be yourself, completely, without asking permission." The next day, news arrived that none of them had anticipated a delegation from the national government would come to visit the region to study the possibility of implementing the Morales model in other parts of the country. The official visit arrived 2 months later, headed by Don Sebastián Lerdo de Tejada, Undersecretary of Rural Development, accompanied by a team of economists, educators, and social planners. For 3 days, the delegation toured every aspect of the operations they attended. Classes at the school, observed cooperative assemblies, reviewed accounting books, interviewed families, and documented every detail of the system that had developed. In the final meeting, Don Sebastián addressed Esperanza and Ignacio directly. "Señores Morales, what you've achieved here is extraordinary, but it also presents a challenge. The government is interested in replicating these methods, but we need to understand if they're scalable at a national level." "With all respect," Don Sebastián, Esperanza responded, "I believe the question isn't whether they're scalable, but whether there's political will to implement them. The methods are simple, accessible education, basic medical care, democratic participation, in economic decisions and real opportunities for progress. The complex part is changing the attitudes of those who have prospered by keeping others in poverty." Don Sebastián nodded slowly. "That's a very insightful observation. Would you be willing to advise other similar projects?" Esperanza looked at Ignacio, and in his eyes she saw the same determination she had seen that first morning when he helped her with the water buckets. "We would be willing," she responded, "but with one condition, that any project we advise includes from the beginning the real participation of women in leadership positions, not as beneficiaries of programs designed by men, but as architects of their own development." "Isn't that somewhat radical for the country's current conditions?" Don Sebastián Ignacio intervened. 10 years ago, it would have been radical to suggest that agricultural workers could be partners instead of employees. 5 years ago, it would have been radical to suggest that a rural school could compete academically with urban institutions. Progress always seems radical until it becomes normal. 6 months later, Esperanza received an official letter naming her National Advisor for Integral Rural Development, a position that hadn't existed before and had been created specifically for her. The appointment ceremony was held in the capital, in a room of the National Palace, where Esperanza felt small for the first time in years. But when she began to speak before the audience of officials, journalists, and diplomats, she found her voice Gentlemen, during the first half of my life, I was invisible because others decided I wasn't worth seeing. During the second half, I worked to make visible others who had been ignored in the same way. I accept this appointment not as a personal honor, but as a responsibility to all those who continue waiting for their opportunity to be seen. The applause that followed was long and sincere, but what Esperanza valued most was seeing Socorro, in the audience now 8 years old, applauding with a smile that clearly said, "That's my mama." 3 years later, in 1893, when Socorro turned 11, the family organized a special celebration at the ranch. It was a party that combined the girl's birthday with the celebration of the 10th anniversary of the first cooperative project. That afternoon, while watching Socorro lead a group of children in a game she had invented, where everyone had to be leaders in turns, Esperanza reflected on everything that had changed. She no longer felt like the invisible woman she had been, nor did she feel like the powerful woman some newspaper articles painted her as. She simply felt like Esperanza, a woman who had learned that true worth is measured not by how others see you, but by how you help others see themselves. Ignacio approached and embraced her from behind. "What are you thinking about? That our daughter will never know what it feels like to be invisible. Is that good or bad?" "It's perfect," Esperanza responded. "It means we did our job well." That night, when all the guests had left and Socorro had finally fallen asleep, Esperanza and Ignacio went out to walk the ranch paths. The full moon illuminated the fields where community crops grew, the houses where prosperous families lived, the school where classes would continue tomorrow. "Do you know what my greatest pride is?" Esperanza told her husband. "What?" "That now when someone asks who's responsible for all this, there are so many names to mention that no one can say it was the work of just one person." Ignacio smiled. The invisible woman became the woman who made an entire world visible. "No," Esperanza corrected. The invisible woman realized she had never really been invisible. She had just been waiting for the right moment to stop asking permission to shine. They walked in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of a prosperous community settling in for sleep, the murmur of family conversations, the occasional cry of a baby being quickly comforted, the soft laughter of young people saying goodbye after a day of work and study. "What do you think your biological mother would say if she could see all this?" Ignacio asked. Esperanza looked at the stars, feeling a deep connection with that woman who had died without knowing her, but had influenced her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I think she would say, I found a way to live the life she couldn't live but always dreamed was possible." When they returned home, Esperanza stopped at the door to look back once more. In the distance, the lights of Tierra Salada village twinkled like terrestrial stars. Some of those lights came from houses where adults who had learned to read after 40 were studying. Others illuminated workshops where products sold as far as the capital were created. Still others accompanied family conversations where futures that would have been unthinkable a decade ago were being planned. She had begun as Esperanza Dolores Herrera, the invisible woman of Tierra Salada. She had passed through being Esperanza Dolores Morales, the fortunate wife who had married above her class. Then she had discovered she was Esperanza Dolores Vasquez, heir to a surname and social position she had never known. But in the end, she had learned she was simply Esperanza, a woman who had discovered that the greatest power wasn't being seen by others, but helping others see themselves with the clarity and love they deserved. As she closed the door of her house that night, Esperanza knew she had found exactly what she had been looking for without knowing it, not just a place in the world, but the ability to create places in the world for others, who, like she had been, were waiting for their moment to stop being invisible. Her story wasn't the story of a woman who had risen above her circumstances, but the story of a woman who had learned to elevate circumstances so that others wouldn't have to be extraordinary to be valued. It was the story of how an invisible woman had learned that true visibility comes not from being seen, but from truly seeing others. And that night, while Socorro slept dreaming of a future where she could be everything she wanted to be, while Ignacio rested, knowing he had chosen to love correctly, and while families throughout the region went to bed with the security that tomorrow would bring new opportunities, Esperanza knew she had lived exactly the life she was destined to live. The woman who had begun invisible to the world, had ended up making the world visible to itself. So, our final reflection. This story teaches us that true transformation doesn't come from waiting for others to see us, but from learning to see the value in ourselves, and more importantly, from using that recognition to help others discover their own worth. Esperanza shows us that being invisible can be paradoxically a form of power. It allows us to observe, understand, and finally transform the systems that perpetuate others' invisibility. Her journey from invisible woman to agent of social change reminds us that we all have the capacity to create opportunities for others to shine, and that true leadership consists of making our light illuminate the path so others can find their own. Esperanza's most powerful lesson. We don't need permission to be who we really are, and when we dare to shine authentically, we give tacit permission for others to do the same. In a world that still struggles with issues of visibility recognition and equal opportunities, Esperanza Dolores' story offers us both hope and a practical map for genuine social transformation.